Riches by Napoleon Hill. And we're on chapter 10, The Law of Cosmic Habit Force. And we are actually midway through the chapter. There was a little mishap while I was recording last time, and some of it didn't go through. So I decided I'm going to cut it there, and I am going to just continue on from the middle of the chapter, which we were reading, The Law of Cosmic Habit Force. And this is chapter 10 of The Master Key to Riches by Napoleon Hill. How to develop a success consciousness. Every highly successful person possesses a well-developed and highly disciplined ego, but there is a third factor associated with the ego, which determines its potency for good or evil. The self-control. There you go, right off the bat. Let's read it one more time as we get into this. Every highly successful person possesses a well-developed and highly disciplined ego, but there is a third factor associated with the ego, which determines its potency for good or evil, the self-control necessary to enable one to transmute its power into any desired purpose. The starting point of all individual achievements and some plan by which one's ego can be inspired with a success consciousness. Interesting. The starting point of all individual achievements is some plan by which one's ego can be inspired with a success consciousness. The person who succeeds must do so by properly developing his or her own ego, impressing it with the object of desire, and removing from it all forms of limitation, fear, and doubt, which lead to the dissipation of the power of the ego. Autosuggestion, or self-hypnosis, is the medium by which one may attune one's ego to any desired rate of vibration and charge it with the attainment of any desired purpose. Unless you catch the full significance of the principle of autosuggestion, you will miss the most important part of this analysis, because the power of the ego is fixed entirely by the application of self-suggestion. When this self-suggestion attains the status of faith, the ego becomes limitless in its power. The ego is kept alive and active, and it is given power by constant feeding. Like the physical body, the ego cannot and will not subsist without food. It must be fed with definiteness of purpose. It must be fed with personal initiative. It must be fed with continuous action through well-organized plans. It must be controlled. It must be supported with enthusiasm. It must be fed by controlled attention directed to a definite end. It must be controlled and directed through self-discipline. It must be supported with accurate thought. And no one can become the master of anything or anyone until becoming the master of the ego. No one can express oneself in terms of opulence while most of one's thought power is given over to the maintenance of a poverty consciousness. Nevertheless, one should not lose sight of the fact that many of great wealth began in poverty, a fact which suggests that this and all other fears can be conquered and removed from interference with the ego. In one word, ego may be found the composite effects. In one word, ego may be found the composite effects. In one word, ego may be found the composite effects of all the principles of individual achievement described in this philosophy, coordinated into one single unit of power, which may be directed to any desired end by any individual who is the complete master of his or her ego. I am preparing you to accept the fact that the most important power available to you, the one power which will determine whether you succeed or fail in your life's ambition, is that represented by your own ego. I am also preparing you to brush aside the time-worn belief which associates the ego with excessive self-love, vanity, and vulgarity, and to recognize the truth that the ego is all there is of a person outside of the few dollars worth of chemicals of which the physical body is composed. Sex is the great creative force of humans. It is definitely associated with and is an important part of one's ego. Both sex and the ego got their bad reputations from the fact that both are subject to destructive as well as constructive application. And both have been abused by the ignorant from the beginning of history. Egoists who make themselves offensive through the expression of ego are those who have not discovered how to relate themselves to their ego in a manner which gives it constructive use. Constructive application of the ego is made through the expressions of one's hopes, desires, aims, ambitions, and plans, and not by boastfulness or an excess of self love. The motto of the person who has his or her ego under control is deeds, not words. Cześć tam, Wiktor. The desire to be great, to be recognized, and to have personal power is a healthy desire. But an open expression of one's belief in one's own greatness is an indication that one has not taken possession of the ego, that one has allowed it to take possession of one, and you may be sure that any proclamations of greatness are but a cloak with which to shield some fear or inferiority complex. The relationship between the ego and mental attitude. Understand the real nature of your ego, and you will understand the real significance of the mastermind principle. Moreover, you will recognize that to be of the greatest service to you, the members of your mastermind alliance must be in complete sympathy with your hopes and purposes. They must not be in they must not be in competition with you in any manner whatsoever. They must be willing to subordinate their own desires and personalities entirely for the attainment of the major purpose in life. They must have confidence in you and your integrity, and they must respect you. They must be willing to pander to your virtues and make allowances for your faults. They must be willing to permit you to be yourself and live your own life in your own way at all times. Last, they must receive from you some form of benefit which will make you as beneficial to them as they are to you. Failure to observe the last mentioned requirement will bring an end to the power of your mastermind alliance. People relate themselves to one another in whatever capacities they may be associated because of a motive or motives. Of course, there can be no permanent human relationship based upon an indefinite or vague motive or upon no motive at all. Failure to recognize this truth has cost many the difference between poverty and wealth. The power which takes over the ego and clothes it with the material counterparts of the thoughts which give it shape is the law of cosmic habit force. This law does not give quality or quantity to the ego. It merely takes what it finds and translates it into its physical equivalent. Those of great achievement are and have always been those who deliberately feed, shape, and control their own egos, leaving no part of the task to luck or chance or to the varying vicissitudes of life. Every person may control the shaping of his or her own ego, but from that point on, that person has no more to do with what happens than the farmer has anything to do with what happens to the seed sown in the soil of the earth. The inexorable law of cosmic habit force causes every living thing to perpetuate itself after its kind, and it translates the picture a person paints or his or her ego into its physical equivalent as definitely as it develops an acorn into an oak tree, and no outside aid whatsoever is required except time. Just one more time. The inexorable law of cosmic habit force causes every living thing to perpetuate itself after its kind, and it translates the picture a person paints of his or her ego into its physical equivalent. That makes sense. As definitely as it develops an acorn from and into an oak tree, and no outside aid whatsoever is required except time. From these statements, it is obvious that we are not only advocating the deliberate development and control of the ego, but also we are definitely warning that no one can hope to succeed in any calling without such control over one's ego. The definition of a properly developed ego. So that there may be no misunderstanding as to what is meant by the term a properly developed ego, I shall describe briefly the factors which enter into its development. First, one must ally oneself with people who will coordinate their minds with one in a spirit of perfect harmony for the attainment of a definite purpose, and that alliance must be continuous and active. Moreover, the alliance must consist of people whose spiritual and mental qualities, education, sex, and age are suited for aiding in the attainment of the purpose of the alliance. For example, Andrew Carnegie's Mastermind Alliance was made up of more than 20 people, each of whom brought to the alliance some quality of mind, experience, education, or knowledge which was directly related to the object of the alliance and not available through any of the other members of the alliance. Second, having placed oneself under the influence of the proper associates, one must adopt some definite plan by which to attain the object of the alliance and proceed to put that plan into action. The plan may be a composite plan created by the joint efforts of all the members of the mastermind group. If one plan proves to be unsound or inadequate, it must be supplemented or supplanted by others until a plan is found which will work. But there must be no change in the purpose of the alliance. Third, one must remove oneself from the range of influence of every person and every circumstance which has even a slight tendency to cause one to feel inferior or incapable of attaining the objects of one's purpose. Positive egos do not grow in negative environments. On this point, there can be no excuse for a compromise, and failure to observe it will prove fatal to the chances of success. The line must be so clearly drawn between a person and those who exercise any form of negative influence on him or her that the door is tightly closed against every such negative influence, no matter what previous ties of friendship or obligation or blood relationship may have existed between them. One more time. The line must be so clearly drawn between a person and those who exercise any form of negative influence on him or her that the door is tightly closed against every such negative influence, no matter what previous ties of friendship or obligation or blood relationship may have existed between them. Fourth, one must close the door tightly against every thought of any past experience or circumstance which tends to make one feel inferior or unhappy. Strong, vital egos cannot be developed by dwelling on thoughts of past unpleasant experiences. Vital egos thrive on the hopes and desires of the yet unattained objectives. Thoughts are the building blocks from which the human ego is constructed. Cosmic habit force is the cement which binds these blocks together in permanency through fixed habits. When the job is finished, it represents, right down to the smallest detail, the nature of the thoughts which went into the building. Fifth, one must surround oneself with every possible physical means of impressing the mind with the nature and the purpose of the ego one is developing. For example, the author should set up a workshop in a room decorated with pictures and the works of authors in the field whom he or she most admires. The bookshelves should be filled with books related to his or her own work. He or she should be surrounded with every possible means of conveying to the ego the exact picture of oneself which one expects to express, because that picture is the pattern the law of cosmic habit force will pick up, the picture it will translate into its physical equivalent. This makes sense. Sixth, the properly developed ego is at all times under the control of the individual. There must be no overinflation of the ego in the direction of egomania by which some destroy themselves. In the development of the ego, one's motto might well be not too much, not too little of anything. When people begin to thirst for control over others or begin to accumulate large sums of money which they cannot or do not use constructively, they are treading upon dangerous ground. Power of this nature grows of its own accord and soon gets out of control. Nature has provided people with a safety valve through which she deflates the ego and relieves the pressure of its influence when an individual goes beyond certain limits in the development of the ego. Emerson called it the law of compensation, but whatever it is, it operates with inexorable definiteness. Napoleon Bonaparte began to die because of his crushed ego on the day he landed on St. Helena Island. People who quit work and retire from all forms of activity after having led active lives generally atrophy and die soon thereafter. If they live, they are usually miserable and unhappy. A healthy ego is one which is always in use and under complete control. Seventh, the ego is constantly undergoing changes for better or for worse because of the nature of one's thought habits. The two factors which force these changes upon one are time and the law of cosmic habit force. I bring to your attention the importance of time as a significant factor in the operation of cosmic habit force. Just as seeds planted in the soil of the earth require definite periods of time for their germination, development, and growth, so do ideas, impulses of thought, and desires planted in the mind require definite periods of time during which law of cosmic habit force gives them life and action. There is no adequate means of describing or predetermining the exact period of time required for the transformation of a desire into its physical equivalent. The nature of the desire, the circumstances which are related to it, and the intensity of the desire are all determining factors in connection with the time required for transformation from the thought stage to the physical stage. The state of mind known as faith is so favorable for the quick change of desire into its physical equivalent that it has been known to make the change almost instantaneously. Humans mature physically within about 20 years, but mentally, which means the ego, we require from 35 to 60 years for maturity. This fact explains why many seldom begin to accumulate material riches in great abundance or to attain outstanding records of achievement in other directions until they are about 50 years old. The ego, which can inspire people to acquire and retain great material wealth, is of necessity one which has undergone self discipline, through which one acquires self confidence, definiteness of purpose, personal initiative, imagination, accuracy of judgment, and other qualities, without which no ego has the power to procure and hold wealth in abundance. These qualities come through the proper use of time. Observe that we did not say they come through the passage of time. Through the operation of cosmic habit force, every individual's thought habits, whether they are negative or positive, whether of opulence or of poverty, are woven into the pattern of one's ego, and there they are given permanent form, which determines the nature and the extent one's spiritual physical status. Of one's spiritual and physical status. The story of how a wife managed her husband's ego. About the beginning of the Depression, the owner of a small beauty salon turned over a back room in her place of business to an old man who needed a place to sleep. The man had no money, but he did have considerable knowledge of the methods of compounding cosmetics. Okay. The owner of the salon gave him a place to sleep and provided him with an opportunity to pay for his room by compounding the cosmetics that she used in her business. Soon the two entered into a mastermind alliance which was destined to bring each of them economic independence. First, they entered into a business partnership with the object of compounding cosmetics to be sold from house to house, the woman providing the money for the raw materials, the man doing the work. After a few years, the mastermind arrangement between the two had proved so profitable that they decided to make it permanent by marriage, although there was a difference of more than 25 years in their ages. Interesting. The man had been in the cosmetics business for the better portion of his adult life, but he had never achieved success. The young woman had barely made a living from her beauty salon. The happy combination of the two brought them into possession of a power which neither had known prior to their alliance, and they began to succeed financially. At the beginning of the Depression, they were compounding cosmetics in one small room and selling their products personally from door to door. By the end of the Depression, some 8 years later, they were compounding their cosmetics in a large factory, which they had bought and paid for, and had more than 100 employees working steadily and more than 4,000 agents selling their products through the nation. During this period, they accumulated a fortune of over $2 million, despite the fact that they were operating during Depression years when luxuries such as cosmetics were naturally hard to sell. They eventually placed themselves beyond the need for money for the remainder of their lives. Moreover, they gained financial freedom on precisely the same knowledge and the same opportunities they possessed prior to their mastermind alliance when both were poverty stricken. I wish the names of these two interesting people could be revealed, but the circumstances of their alliance and the nature of the analysis I shall now present makes this impractical nevertheless. I am free to describe what I conceive to be the source of their astounding achievement, viewing every circumstance of their relationship entirely from the viewpoint of an unbiased analyst who is seeking only to present a true picture of the facts. The motive which brought these two people together in a mastermind alliance was definitely economic in nature. The woman had previously been married to a man who failed to earn a living and who deserted her when her child was an infant. The man also had been previously married. There was not the slightest indication of the emotion of love as a motive for both parties' second marriage. The motive was entirely a mutual desire for economic freedom. The business and the elaborate home in which the couple lived were entirely dominated by the old man, who sincerely believed that he was responsible for both. The man's name was on every package of merchandise which left the factory. It was printed in large letters on every delivery truck they operated, and it appeared in large type on every piece of sales literature and in every advertisement they published. The wife's name was conspicuous by its total absence. I'll be right back. Wszystko dobrze?
Możesz mi rozmawiać.
Coś kończę.
Dobra,
To mogę za chwilę? Jak nie, to mogę teraz. Co potrzebujesz?
Ja tylko ten film, żebyś
O,
mi
to zrobię teraz.
włączył.
Jak muszą? Fajnie, że to w tych okularach. Na którym jesteście tu?
Ale to chyba samo już się wystarcza.
Myślę, że sezon na odcinek 1.
Nie, sezon drugi. Sezon drugi.
A, już trzeci jestem. Patrzę, gdzie jest czerwone. A jak czerwony, to oglądnięte. To ty może wszystko oglądałaś. W drugim sezonie jesteś pewnie, tak?
Tak, w drugim sezonie.
Okej, to powiem. Pierwszy jest Rom, nowe początki, zapach strachu, diabeł wśród nas.
To było.
Do tych wroga krwawy ruch, dzień odrodzenia. Do tych wroga. To jest właśnie po tym, co powiedziałeś, że było. Pójść jedno do tyłu. Może pójść jeden do tyłu. To było? To może do tyłu pójdzie jedno, czy chcesz teraz? Tak, tylko że tutaj pokazało, że wszystko było. O, do diabeł wśród nas jest ten, co powiedziałeś. I potem ten, co robiłem. Chcesz, żebym diabeł wśród nas włożył? Zobaczymy, jak będzie. Tak? Pewnie tam tu jest następny odcinek. Chcesz, żebym ostatnie 10 minut tutaj może? Cukrowy jeden jakąś truciznę pewnie. Pewnie tak. Porzucają jakieś z samochodu. Jedno do tyłu dać?
Nie.
To na pewno. To jest w drugim sezonie. No.
na fotelu to oglądałaś? Pamiętasz te? Tak czasami jest, że zapomina jak ten. To oglądaj ten, ja po prostu zazwyczaj na tym dobrym odcinku i jak powiesz, że tam to też zaraz tu znajdziemy coś innego. Okej? Czy nie?
Alrighty, folks, I am back. What's going on, the Classic Cube? Good to see all y'all. Thanks for the likes. I had to go help my aunt with something in the other room, and we are back to reading where we're at. Okay, let me just find my spot here. Appreciate y'all, by the way. Classic Cube. Appreciate any subscriptions too if you like when people read audiobooks. It's very The man believed that he had built the business, that he operated it, that it could not operate without him. The truth of the matter is precisely the opposite. His ego built the business and ran it, and the business might have continued to run as well or better without his presence as with it. For the very good reason that his wife developed that ego, and she could have done the same for any other man under similar circumstances. Patiently, wisely, and with purpose aforethought, this man's wife fed his ego the type of food which removed from it every trace of his former inferiority complex, which was born of a lifetime of deprivation and failure. She hypnotized her husband into believing himself to be a great business tycoon. Whatever degree of ego this man may have possessed before it came under the influence of a clever woman had died. Whatever degree of ego this man may have possessed before it came under the influence of a clever woman had died of starvation. She revived his ego, nurtured it, fed it, and developed it into a power of stupendous proportions despite his eccentric nature and his lack of business ability. In truth, every business policy, every business move, and every forward step the business took was the result of the wife's ideas, which she so cleverly planted in her husband's mind that he failed to recognize their source. In reality, she was the brains of the business, he the mere window dressing, but the combination was unbeatable, as evidenced by their astounding financial achievements. The manner in which this woman completely affected herself was not only one convincing evidence of her complete self-control, it was evidence of her wisdom, for she probably knew she could not have accomplished the same results alone or by any other methods than those she adopted. This woman had very little formal education and I have no idea how or where she learned enough about the operation of the human mind to inspire her to merge her entire personality with that of her husband for the purpose of developing in him the ego he had. Perhaps the natural intuition which many women possess was responsible for her successful procedure. Whatever it was, she did a thorough job, and it served the ends she sought by bringing her economic security. Here, then, is evidence that the major difference between poverty and riches is merely the difference between an ego that is dominated by an inferiority complex and one that is dominated by a feeling of superiority. This old man might have died a homeless pauper if a clever woman had not blended her mind with his in such a way as to feed his ego with thoughts of and belief in his ability to attain opulence. This is a conclusion from which there is no escape. Moreover, this case is only one of many that could be cited to prove that the human ego must be fed, organized, and directed to definite ends if one is to succeed in any walk of life. Wow, I'm getting some nuggets right now. I hope you are too. That's always, the point of this is you're either getting information from the actual words and you're understanding new concepts, or just from the frequency of what is being given out, your ideas are evolving. Because that's really all this is. It's called the Master Key to Riches for a reason. We're reading it because we want to become more rich in mind and in monetary standpoint, correct? The Amazing Ego of Henry Ford. The Henry Ford ego, famous because of what the public at large does not know about it, was a combination of his own ego and that of his wife. The definiteness and singleness of purpose, persistence, self-reliance, and self-control, so obviously important parts of the Ford ego, could be traced largely to the influence of Mrs. Ford. The Ford ego, quite unlike that of the cosmetician I previously described, functioned without glamour or ostentation of any kind. It functioned in an obvious spirit of humility of the heart. During his lifetime, there were no large pictures of Henry Ford hanging on the walls of his office. But make no mistake about this. Mr. Ford's influence was felt by every person associated directly or indirectly with his vast industrial empire, and even today, something of Henry Ford himself goes into every automobile which leaves the Ford factories. These are the means whereby he expressed his ego, through mechanical perfection, through transportation service which is dependable, at a popular price, through the satisfaction he got from giving employment directly and indirectly to millions of men and women. Mr. Ford was not above appreciating a word of praise, but he never went out of his way to attract it. His ego did not require constant pampering such as that given the cosmetician by his wife. Mr. Ford's method of appropriating the knowledge and experience of other men was entirely different from that of an Andrew Carnegie and most other business magnates. His ego was so modest and consuming in that he never encouraged favorable comment upon his work, nor went out of his way to express any form of appreciation of the compliments which were paid him. Henry Ford had one of the truly great minds of the world. He had a great mind because he learned to recognize the laws of nature and to adapt himself to them in a manner beneficial to himself, but many believe that his greatness was derived in a large measure from the influence of his wife and his association with other great minds, including those of Thomas A. Edison, Luther Burbank, John Burroughs, and Harvey Firestone, with whom he had a mastermind alliance for a great number of years. For many years, these five men would leave their respective business and go away together in some quiet spot where they would exchange thoughts and feed their egos on the food each needed and craved. Henry Ford's personality, his business policies, and even his physical appearance began to show a decided improvement from year to year because of his association with these four men. Their influence upon him was definite, deep, profound, and enduring. Henry Ford had his ego completely under his control. By studying those of great achievement, one may observe that the space they occupy in the world is an exact proportion to the extent to which they dominate their egos. The cosmetician occupied and controlled only the space bounded by his own business and his household. It did not extend beyond these bounds, and it never could. His own mental attitude fixed these limits, and cosmic habit force made the fixation permanent. Henry Ford occupied and controlled only the space bounded by his own business and his household. It did not extend beyond these bounds, and it never could. His own mental attitude fixed these limits, and cosmic habit force made the fixation permanent. Henry Ford occupied in one way or another practically all the space of the world, and he influenced in many ways the entire trend of civilization because he was master of his ego. Henry Ford was capable of acquiring any material thing he set his heart upon. The cosmetician expressed his ego in many forms of childish, petty selfishness. Consequently, he limited his influence to the mere accumulation of a few $1 million and the domination without their consent of a few. Consequently, he limited his influence to the mere accumulation of a few $1 million and the domination without their consent of a few hundred people, including his own household and his employees. Henry Ford expressed his ego in ever expanding and increasing terms of benefit to mankind, and without making a bid for it, found himself an influencing factor throughout the world. This is an astounding thought. It provides vitally important suggestions as to the type of ego one should endeavor to develop. Henry Ford had developed an ego which extended itself into plans belting the entire earth. He thought in terms of the manufacture and distribution of millions of automobiles. He thought in terms of tens of thousands of men and women working for him. He thought in terms of millions of dollars of working capital. He thought in terms of a business he dominated by establishing his own policies for procuring working capital by which he kept his business out of the control of others. He thought in terms of economy through efficient coordination of the efforts of the thousands of men and women who worked for him, and by setting up pay schedules and working conditions far more favorable to his employees than they could reasonably demand. He thought in terms of harmonious cooperation between himself and his business associates and put his thoughts into action by removing from his organization anyone who did not see eye to eye with him. These are the qualities and traits of character which nourished, fed, and maintained the Ford ego. There is nothing about any of these qualities which is difficult to understand. They are qualities anyone may have by simply adopting them and using them. Turn the spotlight on the many who began to build automobiles after Henry Ford began. Study each of them carefully, and you will learn quickly why one remembers but few of them, or the brands of automobiles they temporarily produced. You will discover that every one of the Ford competitors who fell by the wayside did so because of self-imposed limitations or dissipation of the ego. You will also find that practically every one of these forgotten inventors apparently possessed as much intelligence as Henry Ford. Not only did the majority of them have better educations than he, many of them had more dynamic personalities as well. The major difference between Henry Ford and his competitors of the past was this: he developed an ego which extended itself far beyond his personal achievements. The others so limited their egos that they soon caught up with them and their plans went on the rocks for want of that something an extended flexible ego does. Pardon me. The major difference between Henry Ford and his competitors of the past was this: he developed an ego which extended itself far beyond his personal achievements. The others so limited their egos that they soon caught up with them, and their plans went on the rocks for want of that something an extended flexible ego does to lead one forward. The well-balanced ego is not subject to serious influence by either commendation. The well-balanced ego is not subject to serious influence by either commendation or condemnation. The person with a well-balanced ego sets his sails in the direction of a definite major purpose, moves on personal initiative in the direction of that purpose, and never looks to the right or to the left. He or she accepts both defeat and victory as the natural essentials of life, but does not allow either to modify future plans. And you who are learning to assimilate this philosophy may reach that estate in the same manner. You have, in the 17 principles of success, all that is required to place you in possession of the master key. Hey, Classic Cube. You are now in possession of all the practical knowledge which has been used by successful people from the dawn of civilization to the present. This is a complete philosophy of life, sufficient for every human need. It holds the secret to the solution of all human problems, and it has been presented in terms the humblest person can understand. You may not aspire to become a corporate or governmental star, but you can and you should aspire to make yourself useful in order that you may occupy as much space in the world as your ego desires. Everyone comes, finally, to resemble those who make the strongest impression upon the ego. We are all creatures of imitation, and naturally we endeavor to imitate the heroes of our choice. This is a natural and helpful trait. Those whose heroes are persons of great faith or fortunate because hero worship. Those whose heroes are persons of great faith are fortunate because hero worship carries with it something of the nature of the hero one worships. The fertile garden spot of the mind. The fertile garden spot of the mind. In conclusion, let me summarize what has been said on the subject of the ego by calling attention to the fact that it represents the fertile garden spot of the mind, wherein one may develop all the stimuli which inspire active faith, or by neglecting to do so, one may allow this fertile soil to produce a negative crop of fear and doubt and indecision, which will lead to failure. The amount of space you occupy in the world is now a matter of choice with you. The master key to riches is in your hands. You stand before the last gate separating you from happiness. The gate will not open to you without your demand that it do so. You must use the master key by making the 17 principles of success your own. You now have at your command a complete philosophy of life that is sufficient for the solution of every individual problem. It is a philosophy of principles, some combination of which has been responsible for every individual success in every occupation or calling, although many may have used the philosophy successfully without recognizing the 17 principles by the names we have given them. No essential factor of successful achievement has been omitted. The philosophy embraces them all and describes them in words and similes that are well within the understanding of a majority of the people. It is a philosophy of concreteness that touches only rarely the abstraction. It is a philosophy of concreteness that touches only rarely the abstractions, and then only when necessary. It is free from academic terms and phrases, which all too often serve only to confuse the average person. The overall purpose of the philosophy is to enable one to get from where one stands to where one wishes to be, both economically and spiritually. Thus, it prepares one to enjoy the abundant life which the Creator intended all people to enjoy. And it leads to the attainment of riches in the broadest and fullest meaning of the word, including the 12 most important of all riches. The world has been greatly enriched by abstract philosophies, from the days of Plato, Socrates, Copernicus, Aristotle, and many others of the same profound caliber of thinkers, on down to the days of Ralph Waldo Emerson, William James, and those who follow their example. Now, the world has the first complete concrete philosophy of individual achievement that provides individuals with the practical means by which they make possession of their own mind and direct it to the attainment of peace of mind, harmony in human relationships, and economic security, and the fuller life known as happiness. Not as an apology, but to serve as an explanation, I call your attention to the fact that throughout this analysis of the 17 principles, we have emphasized the more important of these principles by continuous reference to them. The repetition was not accidental. It was deliberate and necessary because of the tendency of all humankind. The repetition was not accidental. It was deliberate and necessary because of the tendency of all humankind to be unimpressed by new ideas or new interpretations of old truths. Repetition has been necessary also because of the interrelationship of the 17 principles, being connected as they are like the links of a chain, each one extending into and becoming a part of the principle preceding it and the principle following it. And last, let us recognize that repetition of ideas is one of the basic principles of effective teaching and the central core of all effective advertising. Therefore, it is not only justified, but it is definitely necessary as a means of human progress. When you have when you have assimilated this philosophy, you will have a better education than the majority of people who leave graduate school with the Master of Arts degree. You will be in you will be in possession of all the more useful knowledge which has been organized from the experiences of the most successful people this nation has produced, and you will have it in a form that can understand and apply. You will have it in that form that you can understand and apply. But remember that the responsibility for the proper use of this knowledge will be yours. The mere possession of the knowledge will avail you nothing. Its use is what will count. One more time. But remember that the responsibility for the proper use of this knowledge will be yours. The mere possession of the knowledge will avail you nothing. It is the use that will count. There you go. And that's the second half of chapter 10. The law of cosmic habit force. The law of cosmic habit force in Master Key to Riches by Napoleon Hill. That one was good and intense. That one had a lot of information. And I recommend for you to always listen to these at least the second time. Not necessarily right away, but it is good to take it in twice and to make sure to stick with all the other tasks that are listed below. And definitely right now, feel free to like this video and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, because it always helps our group grow. And definitely put down some comments of any questions that you have so that people can communicate with the other, with the other members, answering questions and giving other sides of their opinions. Without that, thank you very much. I appreciate you, and I hope you have an incredible day. Peace. Master Key to Riches is yours.